Nnenna had counted the exits before the first guest ever sat down. It was not something she decided to do. It was something her body did on its own, the way a drowning person reaches for anything solid. 3 exits. The main door behind the host's table, 2 exposed. The service corridor to her left, narrow, but clean. The emergency stairwell behind the east curtain, dark, but direct. She had clocked all 3 within 40 seconds of stepping into the Emerald Room. And she had spent the rest of her shift quietly watching them. That was the thing about training. It did not leave you just because you wanted it to. She moved between tables with her tray held level, her face soft and unreadable, her eyes doing something else entirely. The Emerald Room held 23 people tonight. 14 were guests. 4 were known security. 3 were kitchen staff she recognized from previous shifts. That left 2 she could not place. A broad-shouldered man near the east pillar who kept his jacket buttoned despite the warmth, and a woman by the service bar who had not poured a single drink in 20 minutes. Nnenna filed both of them away and kept walking. At the center table, Kwon Daesung was everything the rumors promised. He sat straight-backed and still, the kind of stillness that did not come from peace but from power. His white shirt was crisp. His expression was carved. The senior delegate across from him, Hwang Min-kyu, was speaking in low, formal tones, nodding with the slow rhythm of a man who believed tonight was already won. It was the younger one that kept pulling her attention back. Bae Sung-jin sat 2 seats to Hwang's right. He was maybe 30, sharp-faced, with the kind of smooth presentation that took real effort to maintain. His suit was perfect. His posture was correct. But his right knee was bouncing beneath the table, a small, fast movement that his jacket hem betrayed every few seconds, and the hand wrapped around his glass had not relaxed once in the last 40 minutes. Nnenna knew that grip. She had seen it before, on men waiting for a signal. She slowed near the side console, straightening a row of unused glasses that did not need straightening, and let her eyes complete their sweep. The room's lighting was warm and low, designed to make everyone look important and nothing look dangerous. Candles threw soft shadows across the walls. The scent of roasted meat and expensive cologne sat heavy in the air. Somewhere beneath it, faint and chemical, she caught something else. Something that did not belong to dinner. Her pulse did not spike. That was the other thing training did. It turned fear into information. She set a clean glass down and moved toward the east side of the room, taking the long route past the curtained stairwell door. As she passed, she let her eyes drift upward for just a fraction of a second toward the tall window that overlooked the neighboring rooftop. The angle was steep. The distance was manageable. And the rooftop across the way had a ventilation unit positioned at exactly the kind of height a patient person with the right equipment would find very useful. She looked away before the thought could finish forming on her face. By the time she reached the service corridor entrance and turned back toward the room, Bae Sung-jin had shifted in his seat. He was no longer looking at Hwang. He was looking at the man by the east pillar, just briefly, just for a single passing second. The kind of look that meant nothing if you were not paying attention, and meant everything if you were. Nnenna breathed in slowly through her nose. She had walked away from this life. She had traded body armor for an apron and a name tag, had chosen invisible over capable, had convinced herself that small and quiet and forgettable was the same thing as safe. For 2 years, she had almost believed it. But the room was wrong. The people were wrong. And Bae Sung-jin's knee was still bouncing. She picked up her tray. She kept her face calm. And somewhere beneath the practiced stillness of a woman who served drinks for a living, the part of her that never fully slept opened its eyes. Hwang Min-kyu rose from his chair like a man who had been rehearsing this moment for weeks. He was older than the others, thick through the shoulders, with silver threading through his dark hair and the deliberate movements of someone who understood ceremony. He lifted the decanter himself, which was unusual. That was a task for the servers. But no one at the table corrected him, and Nnenna, watching from the service corridor entrance, noted it the way she noted everything tonight, quietly, completely, without letting it show on her face. He began to pour. The room shifted in the way rooms do when something important is about to happen. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Chairs adjusted. The 4 known security personnel moved to the edges of the space in a loose, practiced formation that was meant to look casual and did not quite succeed. Kwon Daesung accepted his glass from an aide and sat forward slightly, his expression unreadable but present, like a man giving a moment the weight it deserved. Nnenna set her tray on the side console and did not pick it up again. Huang began to speak. His voice was low and measured, carrying just enough to fill the room without effort. She did not understand every word. Her Korean was functional, not fluent, but she understood the structure. This was a formal toast. The kind built from old language and older obligation. The kind where every phrase was a small brick in a larger wall being constructed between two parties who did not fully trust each other yet. She watched Kwan's face as Huang spoke. He was listening, really listening, not the performed attention of a man waiting for his turn to speak, but the focused stillness of someone measuring each word for what it actually cost to say. Whatever else Kwan Daesung was, he was not careless. That made what she was about to see worse. Huang lifted his own glass. The gesture rippled around the table as the other delegates followed, Crystal catching the candlelight in a brief, collective glitter. Bae Sungjin rose with the rest of them. His expression finally settled into something smooth and ceremonial. His knee had stopped bouncing. That was the detail that turned Nnenna's blood cold. A nervous man stops being nervous for one of two reasons. Either the threat has passed, or the moment he was nervous about has finally arrived. She looked at the window. The rooftop across the way was dark. The ventilation unit sat exactly where she had noted it earlier, a squat shadow against the dim city sky. Nothing moved. Nothing reflected. The glass was thick, and the distance was real, and any other person in that room would have seen nothing at all. Nnenna was not any other person. She saw the dot. It was small, barely larger than a shirt button. A deep, concentrated red that pulsed with the faint, living tremble of a held breath on the other end of a scope. It appeared on the white tablecloth first, skimming the linen like a quiet question, and then it moved. Slowly, with the calm, unhurried confidence of someone who had already accounted for every variable. It climbed Kwan's sleeve. It crossed his lapel. It settled, with a stillness that felt almost gentle, just left of center on his chest. The whole journey had taken 4 seconds. Nnenna counted them the way she had been trained to, not in panic, but in the cold, clean arithmetic of someone calculating how many seconds remained before an irreversible thing happened. Huang's voice rose slightly as he neared the end of the toast. Around the table, glasses tilted upward. Kwan's arm began to rise, his expression open for the first time all evening, prepared to receive the moment in good faith. The dot did not move. Nnenna's hand found the neck of the open wine bottle on the console beside her. Her fingers closed around it. Her eyes did one final sweep, the east pillar. The service bar, the curtained door, Bae Sungjin's perfectly still face. The room felt suddenly very small. The candles too bright. The silence between Huang's last word and the moment every glass would meet too wide and too dangerous to cross. She had maybe 3 seconds. Possibly 2. She stepped forward. She did not run. Running would have triggered every security hand in the room. She walked fast. The kind of fast that looked like urgency without looking like threat. A server who had spotted a spill. A staff member rushing to correct a small mistake before it became an embarrassing one. Her shoes were flat and quiet on the polished floor. The wine bottle was angled low at her side. Her eyes were already past the table, fixed on the window, counting the tremor of that red dot against Kwan's chest. It had not moved. Whoever was behind that scope was patient, disciplined. They were waiting for the glasses to meet, for the noise and movement of the toast to swallow the sound of the shot. A professional calculation. Clean and cold, and almost elegant in the way terrible things sometimes are. Nnenna had 3 steps left when Oh Jae-suk moved into her path. He was Kwan's lead bodyguard, broad and fast. And his hand came up with the automatic authority of a man whose entire purpose was to put himself between his principal and anything that moved too quickly. His eyes were hard. His jaw was set. He said something sharp in Korean that she did not need to translate. She had 1 second to make a choice. She dropped the bottle. The sound of it hitting the floor cracked through the room like a starter pistol, and in the half-breath of confusion that followed, heads turning, shoulders flinching, Oh Jae-suk's eyes cutting downward for just a fraction of a second, Nnenna went around him. 2 steps. 1 reach. Her hand closed around the base of Kwan's glass, just as his arm completed its rise, and she pulled. Not gently. Not with apology. She yanked the glass sideways with the full, committed force of someone who understood that hesitation here was the same as failure, and the deep red wine left the crystal in a wide, sweeping arc that crossed the white tablecloth, climbed the front of Kwan's shirt, and bloomed across his chest like something terrible and final. For a single suspended moment, the room stopped breathing. The wine was dark against the white linen. It spread in uneven edges, soaking through the fabric, pooling in the folds of his collar. It looked exactly like what it was meant to look like, and the sight of it hit the room the way she had intended, with horror, with confusion, with the kind of visceral shock that drops people below the level of the furniture before their minds have finished processing why. Kwan went down, not because he understood, because his body recognized the visual before his mind could argue with it, and a man who has survived as long as Kwan Daesung survives by listening to his body. The window shattered half a second later. The shot came in high and adjusted, clipping the top edge of the chair where Kwan's head had been, punching through the far wall with a sound like a hammer through dry wood. Plaster dust, screaming from somewhere to the left. The security formation collapsed inward and outward at the same time, half the men going for Kwan and half spinning toward the window with weapons clearing holsters in the sudden, roaring chaos of a room that had just transformed from a dinner party into a kill zone. Nnenna was already on the floor beside Kwan. She pressed her shoulder against his, keeping her profile low, her eyes already moving. East Pillar, Service Bar, Bae Sung-jin. The young delegate was the only person in the room who had not flinched. He stood with his glass still raised, his face arranged in an expression of shock that had been put on like a coat, and his eyes were moving in exactly the wrong direction. Not toward the window where the shot had come from, but toward the east pillar, checking, confirming. Nnenna locked that detail away and said nothing. Around her the room was noise and broken glass, and the hard, overlapping voices of men who had trained for violence but had not expected it tonight. Oh Jae-suk was shouting. Someone was calling for the exits to be sealed. Kwan turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were sharp and very still, the eyes of a man who was already past the shock and into the question. She met his gaze and held it. "Stay down," she said quietly. It wasn't the only shooter. Kwan stared at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said something in Korean to Oh Jae-suk that Nnenna did not catch. But the bodyguard's response was immediate and physical. He dropped into a low crouch and put himself on Kwan's left side, weapon drawn, eyes sweeping the room with the tight, controlled movement of a man who had just been reminded what his job actually was. The room was still loud, still breaking apart at its edges. 2 delegates were under the table. One was pressed against the far wall with his hands raised as though the ceiling might fall. The woman from the service bar had vanished, which told Nnenna everything she needed to know about where that woman's loyalties had been placed. The man from the east pillar was still visible, standing too still in all the wrong chaos, his right hand inside his jacket. She had maybe 40 seconds before the room reorganized itself around the wrong priorities. "Main door is compromised," she said, keeping her voice low and level, directing it at Oh Jae-suk without looking away from the east pillar. "The service corridor has a camera blind spot between the cold storage unit and the fire panel. 12 meters. Takes you directly to the loading dock on the north side." Oh Jae-suk looked at her the way people always looked at her in these moments, with the particular expression of someone trying to decide very quickly whether to trust a person they had no reason to trust. "I have worked this building for 4 months, she said. "I know every corner of it." He does not have 4 months. He has 30 seconds. Something shifted in Oh Jae-suk's face. Not trust exactly. More like the practical decision of a professional who recognized another professional and chose results over pride. He spoke to Kwan again, low and rapid. Kwan's eyes had not left Nnenna. They were the kind of dark that did not give much away, but she could see the calculation running behind them. Fast, thorough. The assessment of a man who had built something worth protecting by knowing when to move and when to wait. The wine stain on his shirt had already dried at the edges. He looked like a man who had survived something, which was precisely what she had needed him to look like. He gave a single short nod. "Move," Nnenna said. She went first, keeping low, using the overturned chairs and the confusion of bodies as cover. Oh Jae-suk followed with Kwan between them, one hand firm on his principal's arm. Head up and scanning. They reached the service corridor entrance in 7 seconds. Nnenna pushed through without slowing, letting the door swing behind her. And the noise of the Emerald Room dropped to a muffled roar as the corridor sealed them in its narrow, fluorescent quiet. She counted steps. The service corridor ran straight for 8 meters before it bent left past the linen storage. The camera was mounted above the linen door. angled toward the main entrance of the corridor. She had noted its range on her third shift. When she had spent an idle hour during a slow evening mapping the building the way her training had taught her. Not out of any plan, just out of habit. Out of the inability to exist in a space without understanding it completely. Camera covers the first 8 meters, she said, moving. After the bend. We're blind to the system. They took the bend. The corridor narrowed further, the walls close and plain, the smell of cleaning products sharp in the cool air. Kwon said nothing. Oh Jae-suk said nothing. Their footsteps were the only sound, quick and disciplined. 3 people who understood that talking was for later. The cold storage unit was a large silver door on the left. The fire panel was bolted to the wall opposite it, a red metal box with a small blinking light. The gap between them was exactly wide enough for a person moving with purpose. The loading dock door was 10 steps further. Nnenna hit the release bar with her forearm, and the night air came in cold and immediate, carrying the smell of the city and the distant sound of sirens that had not yet found their direction. She stepped through and turned. Kwon emerged behind her, straightening to his full height in the open air, and for the first time since the glass had shattered, he looked directly at her with something that was not confusion and was not gratitude. It was the look of a man forming a question he intended to have answered. The safe house was a 4th-floor apartment above a dry cleaning business on a street that asked no questions. Oh Jae-suk had driven them there in a black car that appeared at the loading dock within 4 minutes of their exit, which told Nnenna that Kwon's security infrastructure, whatever its current failures, still had functional parts. She had sat in the back beside a man she did not know, in a car arranged by an organization she did not trust, moving through a city that had already taken enough from her, and she had kept her hands visible and her breathing steady and her eyes on the passing streetlights the entire way. Old habits. The apartment was plain and deliberately so. Clean walls, functional furniture, a table for chairs, a kitchen that looked unused, windows covered with fitted blinds that allowed no gap at the edges. The kind of space that had been assembled by someone who understood that a safe house was not meant to feel like anything. It was meant to disappear. Kwon sat at the table and said nothing for a long moment. He had accepted a clean shirt from Oh Jae-suk and changed without ceremony, handing off the wine-stained one with the flat detachment of a man disposing of evidence. He had washed his hands. He had drunk half a glass of water. And now he sat with both hands resting on the table in front of him, his posture controlled, his expression arranged into something that was working very hard to remain composed. Nnenna sat across from him and waited. You work the Thursday and Friday evening shifts, he said finally. His English was precise and lightly accented, each word placed with intention. You have worked them for 4 months. You are always on time. You have never broken a glass. She said nothing. Tonight you broke one deliberately, he continued. You identified a sniper position from inside a room with inadequate sight lines, calculated the trajectory of a round through a reinforced window, and redirected my body below that trajectory using a social action that would not immediately read as a security response. He paused. You did all of this in under 3 seconds. The room was very quiet. I would like to know, Kwon said, and his voice dropped just slightly. The way voices do when they are carrying more weight than the words alone suggest. Who sent you? Nobody sent me. That is the answer I expected, he said. It is not the answer I am prepared to accept. Nnenna looked at him steadily. She had sat across from harder men in smaller rooms with a great deal less oxygen, and she had learned that the fastest way through an interrogation was usually the truth, delivered without decoration. 7 years ago, I was a tactical intelligence analyst, she said. Private security firm. High-level contracts, high-risk environments. The kind of work that does not appear in any employment registry. She kept her voice flat and even. I spent 3 of those years doing exactly what I did tonight. Reading rooms. Mapping threats. Identifying kill zones before they became active. It was not a gift. It was a skill. Learned the same way any skill is learned. Kwon had not moved. For years ago a mission failed, she continued. People died. My partner died. The firm needed someone to carry the weight of that, and I was the most convenient option. My credentials were pulled. My record was altered. I was removed from the industry entirely and replaced with a version of events that had very little connection to what actually happened. She let that sit for a moment. I became a waitress, she said, because it was the kind of work that lets you stay invisible. And I stayed invisible because the people who framed me are still operational. And a dead woman cannot build a case. Oh Jae-suk, standing near the window, had gone very still. Kwon's eyes had not left her face through any of it. He was reading her the same way she had read the Emerald Room. Carefully, completely, looking for the thing that did not fit. The firm that framed you, he said slowly. What was it called? Nnenna studied his expression. Something had moved behind his eyes when she said the word framed. Something that looked less like surprise and more like recognition. Iron Sight Group, she said. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before it. Kwon sat back in his chair, and for the first time all evening, he looked like a man who had just received an answer he had not expected, but perhaps had needed for a very long time. Kwon was quiet for a long time after she said the name. Not the quiet of a man who had nothing to say. The quiet of a man sorting through a great deal, deciding what order to say it in, and how much of the truth to offer in return for how much he had just received. Nnenna had met enough powerful men to know the difference. She waited, her hands flat on the table, her expression giving nothing away. He rose from the chair and moved to the kitchen counter, where a plain envelope sat beside the unused kettle. He picked it up, turned it once in his hands, and set it in front of her. She did not touch it. 8 weeks ago, he said, returning to his seat, a member of my organization was approached by a private security contractor offering what was described as enhanced protection services, perimeter management, intelligence support, the kind of language that sounds like an upgrade until you understand what it actually means. His voice was even and precise. The contractor provided credentials, references, a portfolio of completed operations across 4 countries. Nnenna looked at the envelope. The company name on those documents, Kwon said, was not Iron Sight. It was a subsidiary, a front. 3 words that meant nothing to me at the time. He paused. They mean something to me now. She opened the envelope. Inside were 6 printed pages. Photographs, communication records. A single organizational diagram printed small and dense with names connected by thin lines. She moved through them steadily. And with each page the cold in her chest settled deeper and more permanent, the way cold does when it stops being a feeling and becomes a condition. She recognized the diagram. Not this version of it. This version had grown, branched into new territories, added names she did not know beneath names she did. But the structure was the same hierarchy, the same operational language, the same invisible architecture that had been built around her 4 years ago like a cage assembled while she was sleeping. They were already inside your organization, she said. For at least 6 weeks before tonight, Kwon confirmed. Bae Sungjin was their access point. He was recruited through financial pressure, debts I was not aware he had accumulated. By the time my people identified the irregularity in his communications, the network had already mapped our security rotations, our safe houses, and our planned schedule for the delegation visit. Nnenna set the pages down. They didn't just want you dead tonight. They wanted the delegation to witness it. A public failure in front of the Korean representatives would have collapsed the alliance and created enough instability for Iron Sight to position itself as the solution. She looked at him. They sell the chaos they create. That's always been their model. Something moved in Kwon's expression. Not surprise. Confirmation. Your partner, he said carefully. The one who died 4 years ago. She held his gaze. His name was Daniel Osei, she said. He was the only person in the firm who had built a complete picture of how Iron Sight operated. Not just the contracts, the internal structure, the names behind the subsidiary companies, the chain of command that connected the public-facing organization to the operations that never appeared in any report. She paused. He was 3 days from delivering that picture to an oversight body when the mission failed. The mission that was arranged to fail, Kwon said. Yes. The word sat between them small and absolute. Oh Jae-suk had moved away from the window. He stood now at the edge of the table. His earlier suspicion replaced by something more complicated, the expression of a security professional recalculating every assumption he had made about the last several hours. The file Daniel built, Nnenna said. He fragmented it before he died, distributed the pieces across separate locations, so that losing one would not mean losing everything. She kept her voice steady. It cost her something to do so. I have spent 2 years locating the pieces. I am missing the last one. She looked directly at Kwon. Your organization received a data transfer from a shell company 18 months ago, she said. Routine on the surface. Embedded inside it was a protected file that Daniel routed to you specifically because he believed you were the one person Iron Sight could not easily compromise. The room was completely still. "I did not come to the Gilded Lily by accident," she said quietly. "I came to find what he left you. I just did not expect to have to save your life first." They went to the hotel on foot. Quan had offered a car and 2 additional security personnel, and Nnenna had declined both. A car could be tracked. Additional personnel meant additional variables, additional noise, additional chances for something to move in the wrong direction at the wrong moment. 6 blocks on foot, in the dark, with one person who knew how to be invisible was cleaner than any alternative he could have offered. Jae-suk came anyway. She had expected that. He walked half a step behind her left shoulder, which was the correct position, and told her something useful about his training. He had changed his jacket to something less formal, and he had put his weapon somewhere that did not print against the fabric. He moved quietly for a large man. She noted all of this and said nothing about it, because the time for building assessments was over and the time for using them had begun. The hotel was a mid-range business property with a lobby that stayed moderately busy past midnight. The kind of place where nobody looked at you directly because everyone was either arriving somewhere or leaving it. Nnenna walked in through the side entrance off the parking structure, past the ice machine and the vending alcove, and took the stairs to the 3rd floor without stopping at the front desk. She had pulled Bay's room number from the hotel's reservation system. During the same window, she had accessed the Gilded Lily records. It had taken her 4 minutes and left no visible trace. Room 314 was at the end of the corridor, away from the elevator, which was either coincidence or preference. She was inclined to think preference. A man waiting for news he was not certain would be good news would want distance between himself and the main traffic of the floor. She stopped 10 feet from the door and listened. Television. Low volume. The flat tone of a news channel running without being truly watched. Movement inside. One person. Unhurried. The soft, irregular sound of someone who was waiting and had not yet received what they were waiting for. She looked at Jae-suk. He nodded once. She knocked. The movement inside stopped immediately. A pause long enough to contain a decision, and then footsteps approaching the door with the careful, measured pace of someone who had remembered to be cautious slightly too late. "Housekeeping," she said. Her voice was easy and flat. Another pause. Then the lock turned. Bae Sung-jin opened the door in a hotel robe with a phone in his right hand and the particular expression of a man whose mind was still 3 steps behind the situation he had just placed himself in. He saw Nnenna first, then Jae-suk, and she watched the sequence of understanding move across his face like weather, confusion, then recognition. Then the very specific and terrible clarity of a man who had just realized that the operation he believed had succeeded had in fact failed completely. He stepped back. Jae-suk stepped forward. It was brief and it was quiet, and when it was finished, Bae Sung-jin was seated in the desk chair with his phone on the table in front of him, and the particular posture of a man who had run his calculations and arrived at the conclusion that cooperation was the only remaining option worth selecting. Nnenna sat on the edge of the bed across from him and picked up the phone. The encryption on it was professional grade, layered in a way that confirmed Iron Sight's involvement as clearly as a signature. She worked through it methodically, not rushing, aware that speed here was less important than completeness. Bae watched her with exhausted eyes and said nothing. What she found inside took 12 minutes to fully extract and catalog. It was more than she had expected. Contact logs, payment confirmations, operational briefs written in the clipped and technical language of people who considered human lives as entries on a balance sheet. And at the bottom of the most recent folder, time-stamped 6 days ago, a name she recognized attached to an authorization she had spent 4 years trying to prove existed. The name of the Iron Sight director who had signed the order that killed Daniel. Her hands stayed steady on the phone. She had promised herself they would. "Is it enough?" Jae-suk asked from behind her. She saved the final file and set the phone down. "It's everything," she said. They were back at the safe house by 2 in the morning. Jae-suk had made 3 calls on the walk back, each one short and quiet. And by the time they climbed the stairs above the dry cleaning business, the apartment had changed. The plain table now held 2 open cases of equipment, a secured communications unit, and a printed organizational chart of Kwan's entire security structure with certain names already circled in red ink. Someone had been busy. Someone had been waiting for instruction. Kwon was standing at the window when they entered, his back to the room, looking at the city through the narrow gap in the blinds that he had permitted himself. He did not turn around immediately. He finished whatever thought he was completing, and then he turned. His eyes went to Nnenna first, then to Oh Jae-suk. Bae Sung-jin, he said. Secured, Oh Jae-suk replied. Separate location. He has not been harmed. Kwon nodded once, the nod of a man filing information rather than reacting to it. He moved to the table and looked at the equipment cases without touching them, his hands in his pockets. His expression carrying the particular weight of someone who had made a large decision in a short amount of time and was now standing on the other side of it. I want to show you something, he said to Nnenna. He opened the laptop and turned it toward her. On the screen was a folder she had not seen before. Its title a string of numbers that meant nothing on the surface. He opened it, and inside was a single protected file with a small green indicator light showing in the corner. The kind of indicator that meant the file had been accessed before and had registered the access. She recognized the encryption format before she read the label. It was Daniel's. She sat down slowly. The room had gone very quiet around her. The kind of quiet that happens when the people in it understand they are standing near something that matters more than they do. It arrived 18 months ago, as you described, Kwon said. I did not know what it was at the time. My technical team flagged it as an anomaly and isolated it. I kept it because I have learned that things which cannot be immediately explained are often more valuable than things which can. He paused. I understand now why it was sent to me specifically. Nnenna looked at the file for a long moment. For years. 2 years of waitressing and watching exits and telling herself that inaction was the same as safety. All of it had been moving toward this small green light on a screen in a safe house above a dry cleaning business at 2 in the morning. Open it, Kwon said quietly. She did. Daniel's final file was exactly what she had known it would be, and somehow still more than she had prepared herself for. 47 pages of structured intelligence. Names, dates. Financial transfers, operational records. A complete chain of command running from Iron Sight's public directors down through 4 layers of subsidiary companies to the people who had given the orders that had never appeared in any official record. It was meticulous, and it was thorough, and it was written in Daniel's precise, unhurried style, the style of a man who had understood that the work had to be good enough to survive without him. She closed the file carefully. I need 3 days, she said, to build this into something that can be submitted to an oversight body that Iron Sight hasn't already compromised. You will have them, Kwon said. He reached into the nearest equipment case and set a credentials wallet on the table in front of her. Inside was an identification card, a building access key, and a single sheet of paper with an authorization code printed at the bottom above his signature. As of tonight, you are my internal security chief. You have full access to my organization's resources, personnel records, and communication systems. She looked at the credentials without picking them up. This changes what I am to them, she said. I stop being invisible. Yes, Kwon said simply. But you also stop being alone. She picked up the credentials wallet and turned it once in her hands. The identification card had her name on it. Her real name, not the quiet, reduced version of herself she had been carrying for 2 years. Nnenna Trump. Internal Security Chief. She slid it into her pocket. Show me the circled names, she said. 3 months later, the Gilded Lily reopened its emerald room. The repairs had taken 6 weeks. The window had been replaced with reinforced glass. The east pillar where the broad-shouldered man had stood was now home to a small decorative shelf holding a single orchid, which Nnenna had chosen herself because she appreciated the small, private humor of placing something living and visible exactly where a threat had once hidden. The room looked the same as it had on the night everything changed, and it looked nothing like it at all. She stood at Kwon's right hand and watched the guests arrive. She was not in an apron. She wore a dark jacket cut close and practical, with the kind of structure that allowed for movement without advertising it. Her credentials were in her inner pocket. Her eyes moved the way they always moved, exits first, then the perimeter, then the faces, then the details that did not fit. It was the same scan she had run on this room 3 months ago while carrying a tray of glasses that she had not cared about. The difference was that nobody expected her to be invisible anymore. The guest list had been rebuilt from the ground up. Every name on it had passed through a verification process that Nnenna had designed herself over the course of 2 weeks. cross-referenced against the intelligence in Daniel's file and the additional records extracted from Bae Sung-jin's phone. 3 members of Kwan's former security team had been quietly removed during the first month. 2 external contractors had been identified as Iron Sight affiliates and referred to the oversight body that was now building its formal case. The process had been careful, and it had been thorough, and it had not been painless, but it had been clean. Iron Sight's director had been placed under formal investigation 11 days ago. Nnenna had received the notification on her secured phone while eating breakfast, and she had sat with it for a long time before she had been able to finish her coffee. She had not told anyone how long she had sat there. Some things were private. The delegation arrived at 7. The new Korean representatives were younger than their predecessors, more careful in their movements, carrying the particular alertness of people who had been fully briefed on what had happened in this room and had come anyway, which Nnenna respected. Oh Jae-suk met them at the entrance and walked them through the space with the quiet efficiency that had become the standard of everything they did now. He caught her eye across the room as the guests settled. She gave him a small nod. He returned it. Kwan moved through the room the way he always moved, with the composed, unhurried authority of a man who understood that presence was its own form of communication. He spoke to each guest briefly and genuinely, and Nnenna tracked the room around him the way she had always tracked rooms, the way she suspected she would always track rooms for the rest of her life. Because training did not leave, and she had stopped wanting it to. When the guests were seated and the decanters had been brought out by staff she had personally vetted, Kwan returned to his position at the head of the table and looked across the room at her. She moved to stand at his right, 1 step back. The correct distance, close enough to act, far enough to observe. The senior delegate rose to offer the toast. Nnenna listened to the formal language and the careful words and the slow, ceremonial weight of 2 parties choosing to build something in a room where destruction had previously been planned. She watched the faces around the table, the genuine ones and the guarded ones, and the ones still learning how to tell the difference between the two. She watched the windows. Clear. She watched the doors. Settled. She watched the room the way she had always watched rooms. And the room gave nothing back but warmth and the soft sound of crystal and the smell of something expensive being poured with intention. When the glasses rose, hers rose with them. Not because she had been asked to. Not because it was required by any credential or authorization or job description. But because she was here. And she was visible. And the debt she had carried for 4 years had finally been replaced by something she had not expected to find on the other side of it. She was not serving the drinks. She was not invisible. She drank.